there is a certain faction of people who I'm sure you've heard from them who want to say there are guys behind the guys who have the real agenda and are running things and are spending the money, and all of these people are just puppets, and all of this is just circus. And, that's just not plausible to me. Like, one of the things you really see up close as a journalist, almost everybody's incompetent. No, almost nobody knows what they're doing. The idea that you could coordinate some globe-striding cabal, it's just like, it's utterly implausible. These people are fucking morons. There's not. I've been looking for 25 years now for the smarter guys behind the dumb guys who are telling me things. There are no smarter guys. There's nobody back there.
Hello and welcome to Urgent Futures, the show that finds signal in the noise. I'm your host, Jesse Damiani. I'm a writer, curator, and professor who's on a continual quest to learn about reality and how it's evolving. Each week, I sit down with leading thinkers whose research, concepts, and questions clarify the chaos, from culture to the cosmos. My guest this week is David Roberts. David Roberts runs the Volts newsletter and podcast and lives in Seattle. Don't let that brief bio fool you. David Roberts is a man of many talents and interests. Volts is a leading outlet for all things decarbonization, from science and tech to politics and policy. If climate change matters to you, Volts is one of the key places you can go to get a sense of what's happening, the stakes, and who's trying to meaningfully create change. So do yourself a favor and go subscribe right now. Understandably, I was excited to bring David on to talk about electrification. And going in, I thought we were going to have a wonky conversation about grid infrastructure, batteries, and all that fun stuff. And we do get into that to a good extent. But what really stands out to me about this interview is David's impassioned approach to progressive politics. I knew this about him going in. The questions I asked to that effect weren't afterthoughts. But I was pleasantly surprised at the places this conversation took us, going deep on pressing topics in sociopolitics, from some armchair psychology of leaders in the MAGA movement to the role that radical centrism plays in determining the American political spectrum. David's longtime tenure as a podcaster shines through. His delivery is on a par with the best comedians, and as you'll see, there are moments where I cannot make myself stop laughing. So let's get right to it. Strap in for this wide-ranging and rollicking conversation with David Roberts. All right, I am joined today by David Roberts. David, thank you for being on Urgent Futures.
Hello, good to be here.
So obviously, given your extensive work covering the energy industry and climate change and climate tech, that's going to be the brunt of our conversation. But in doing research, I found that your background is in philosophy. So I want to start there. So one, I guess to start, could you describe what the particular philosophy that you studied way back when?
Sure. This is it's a slight exaggeration to call it a background. I might be puffing it up a little bit. I got a undergrad in Tennessee, and then I went out to Montana and bounced around a while, and then got a master's in philosophy at the University of Montana, which is like known for many things, but not philosophy. and then I went to the University of Alberta up in Edmonton to start on my PhD and did about a year of work there and then bailed. So I've got a master's in philosophy. I was going to, I really loved the American pragmatists, James and Dewey, up through Rorty, all that whole tradition. And then I really loved cognitive science, sort of thinking about like, what is consciousness, what is thinking, what is the self, all that kind of stuff, and marrying those two somehow around ethics. That's what I had in mind, but I never got that far. I couldn't hang with Edmonton.
Was environmental ethics part of your field of study,
No,
or did that?
it was
No?
not. No. I bailed out of grad school and went to Seattle just kind of on a wild hair. And so I had that was like 27. no job experience, no no job skills, nothing. Competing with like 21-year-olds for entry-level tech jobs, basically. And I stumbled into there was a job on Craigslist for the editorial assistant at a place called Grist, a nonprofit green publication still around, called Grist. And so I just wrote them. I was like, I have no experience, no background in any of this, but I really need a job, and I know how to write. And that was it. So I snuck in there, and everything else has been completely self-taught. So I had no background in environmental anything really. Although I will say, my advisor in my master's program at the University of Montana is a guy named Andrew Light, who is actually pretty well known in philosophy as an environmental philosopher. And then also, after I left the academy, he also left the academy and ended up working for like the World Resources Institute. He worked for the U.S. delegation to the COP meetings. So he's actually in my world now. We've like bumped into each other several times. It's interesting. So he did environmental ethics, but I didn't really know. I came to the whole basic subject of all of this stuff from the outside, which I think has been, there are good and bad parts about it, but I think has overall been an advantage, honestly, over the course of my career.
Mm. I had somebody once tell me we were doing prep for a fireside chat for a conference, and she said that part of why she was comfortable with me moderating the fireside chat was she was like, "You're like an insider outsider," and I was very sort of tickled by that, and I hear that in what you're saying too. So like, what is it about coming to it kind of laterally or not quite the sort of normal path that you think
Yeah,
brings
yeah.
a different perspective?
I would say two things, I guess. One specifically about me, and then one more general. Like specifically about me, I'm just like my character, my personality is generally pretty solitary and independent. I'm not a joiner. I'm averse to joining, averse to team membership of almost any kind, which is like, you know, we don't have to get into therapy here, but you can take that you can take that character trait too far. But let's just say that I think it's an advantage in professionally, and just in that I don't like when you come up through a field or come up in a world, you just absorb the assumptions and kind of the worldview of that world, and often just take them for granted and don't think about it. And if you come at it from the outside, you can see all that stuff a little bit more objectively. You can see, you can pick it apart and pick and choose what parts you want to accept. And also, journalism specifically, like I read a lot about politics, and it used to sort of like nag at me that I was living in Seattle, and basically my cohort, the people I was writing with and about, were all in DC. But it has been my experience over time that quite often, this is true in any world, especially in politics, especially in DC politics, I think the closer you are, the more your view is distorted. Kind of the less you know what's going on. You know what I mean? Like those guys who are actually in the Senate cloakroom often are the most clueless. You know what I mean? Because they don't have that perspective. They don't have that context. They're very in it, So just being an outsider generally, I think, is helpful in journalism, both as a personality and as a structurally. And then finally, I'll just say about my subject specifically. One of the things I used to think about a lot, is I started this around 2004. So mostly it was just green at that point, it was green journalism. I sort of found myself attracted to climate change precisely because, like most environmental problems, like this factory is putting out this pollutant, which is going in the water, causing these health problems. They are socially bad, important, but intellectually not that interesting. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty straightforward what's going on. There's not a lot of thought work to be done on it. But climate change is a conceptual challenge, especially back then. Like people genuinely had difficulty knowing how to think about it. Like what kind of thing is it? How, you know what I mean? Like very basic. And to me, that's like, I always joke with people, like doing work like that is more what I wanted out of philosophy than anything I could have gotten in the academy, right? Because in the academy, you're like hyper specialized. You're writing for the three other people in your subfield. You know what I mean? But I'm out here in public actually doing intellectual work that is helpful for people to clarify things that they need to be thinking about. And that's like philosophy in the field to me and is way more fun and interesting than academic philosophy. So that's why I was attracted to climate change. But I mean, the thing about climate change, notably, especially back then, was it had been introduced to US culture and society via environmentalism, via environmentalists. They sort of noticed it first, adopted it, but that meant that it was introduced to broader culture with all the environmentalist baggage attached, both in the way that non-environmentalists see environmentalists, right? Like kind of hippie, earth-loving, impractical, don't understand the economy, don't understand real, you know what I mean? They're not real. They're just frou-frou, all that stuff. And then also like the environmentalists themselves had this sort of model in mind built around kind of point source pollution. You know, corporations are doing it. The way you solve it is you pass a regulation, tell the corporation to stop emitting that thing. You know, the whole model of public policy and thinking about it that is not very well suited to climate change. So I actually think it's like there's a lot of sort of cleanup work to be done, and that's still ongoing. Like people, like especially people outside of my little world, are still, I think, confused about what climate change is and confused about what solving climate change means. And even I think the environmental community itself remains sort of confused and split about exactly how to think about climate change and how to approach it and what to do about it. But anyway, that's like for someone who likes thinking and systems, you know, systems thinking, this is just like a pig in shit. I don't know if we can, I'm sorry, I don't know if we can curse.
Yeah, yeah.
We
Go
curse
ahead.
here,
Go
but
ahead.
like, you know, just wallowing in this stuff. Like it's just fun. People need thinking help. And I'm, turns out, good at providing thinking help, good at almost nothing else in this world, but I am good at that. So like, you know, stumbled into it was all coincidence and random, but it worked out really well.
Mm. Well, I can't speak to the rest of your capabilities, but as a longtime Volts stan, I can concur that your ability to not only bring us the right minds, but really host drilled down conversations in accessible language. And I think people just hear podcasts, and I'm guilty of this too, and you're just listening to a conversation and it feels easy. And they don't understand that when it feels that easy, that's because the interviewer has spent hours and hours and hours sort of refining the skill. So I just want to really applaud and thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Again, I joke with my family. I was like, about the time I was like 16, I started this cycle where I would get assignments, procrastinate on them, frantically learn about them at the last minute, and then pull it off, and then do the next one. And that's like still what I do to this day. Like basically, I've been doing basically exactly that for like 40 some years now. You know, whatever, it's my thing.
Listen, ADHD tendencies can be a superpower. I'm totally here for
You
it.
just gotta aim them in the right direction.
Exactly. I want to earlier, like a couple beats ago, you talked about how even the climate community is getting climate change wrong. I want to sort of get to that question, but I also want to just flag for people, like kind of extend something you're saying, which is like the thing that drives me absolutely batty is when I see mainstream media coverage that frames the issue as an issue being brought forward by environmentalists, or like environmentalists alarmed that da-da-da happened. And it's like, hi, we all live on this planet.
Yes,
We need this planet to
yes.
be habitable.
That is that baggage. That is that baggage that is still hanging on. Still hanging on. I mean, the media is so terrible on this. Don't get me started. But yeah, it's that is
No,
still
get me started.
still the model people have. People still think of like environmentalists are worried about some critter in the desert. And that's like good in the abstract, but it's good the way that like starving kids in Africa. You know what I mean? Like some people decide that they want to devote their lives to that but like most people don't care and don't need to, right? Like nothing about starving kids in Africa is going to come to their lives and bother them. That's how they think of climate change. It's sort of this like abstract nature, like, oh, these people out here worried about nature. Not it's, people don't think of it negatively necessarily, just as like a sort of a niche preoccupation, right? And so the idea that it's going to materially affect all of us and our economies and our future and the future generations, et cetera, has not sunk in.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about that. Like, what's like extending that because that comment was kind of geared a little bit more toward the public, but within the climate community, how is the climate community getting their messaging wrong? And also, just if we can kind of pierce through, like from your estimation, how do we frame it correctly?
Well, I'm so leery of this discussion. As you can imagine, having been doing this for 20 some years now, I've had this exact discussion a cajillion times. People have been asking that question and arguing about this from the get go. And I've just become very sort of generally leery about the whole discussion. For one thing, it's very, very easy for people to ride in from outside and say, all you people who've been studying this and worrying about it and throwing your bodies against the machinery and organizing, you're all silly. And I've brought the magic words that's going to clear this whole thing up. All of you are so silly that with a few minutes thought, me, brave white bearded guy from the outside, has come riding in with the magic words. Right? I'm so sick of that stuff. Like we overestimate. I think broadly on the left are especially these days, given all the sorting that's happened that we can talk about or not. But like these days, generally, like especially prominent people on the left are sort of A students. They mastered the system. They got the credentials. You know what I mean? They did the homework, all this kind of stuff, and so they really, really highly value words and language and tend to overestimate, I think, how much the world runs on words. And in fact, it turns out the world runs on power. And given that one of the things we need to do to solve climate change is basically disempower, shrink, and eventually destroy one of the largest, richest, and most powerful industries ever to live, it's probably the case that they're going to fight us on that no matter what we say, right? No, but even we call it global weirding. You could come up with your fun, frame it as a national security issue, frame it as an economic issue. All these people write in and offer these suggestions, and everybody in my world is like, dude, we've been doing that for 20 years now. You won't change the way you talk about it. We changed the way we talk about it a long time ago, and it just doesn't matter. Like talk doesn't matter. So I'll just say that. And number two, there's no right and wrong here. Like this is all, no one knows. This is all everything that's happening to our species. It's unprecedented. Nobody knows. There's not experience to draw on here. So we don't know how we ought to be talking about this or dealing with it. It's completely unprecedented. And we're the first, this is like all new in the world. So it's very glib and easy to say the environmental movement is getting its framing wrong. That's the easiest way to approach this subject from the outside, but it's also the cheapest and least meaningful. So that's all by way of preface. But I'll just say there is a split in the environmental movement, or I'll just say there's a split more broadly between people who see climate change and think this is humankind's punishment for arrogance and brutishness, growing too fast, consuming too much. And the answer is to shrink back, basically, to cut back on our consumption, basically, to cut back on our lifestyles, be more sort of like agrarian and closer to the land, and et cetera, et cetera. This sort of like deceleration or degrowth impulse, I think, was probably that is the sort of dominant thinking in the truly hardcore environmental movement, and that kind of thinking was extended to climate change. And I think even people who are outside the environmental world, a lot of people are like, yeah, this is humankind's comeuppance, right? This is what we get for how we've behaved, and we need to like shrink back. That's one impulse. The other impulse is these are growing pains, like as a crude kind of, as a crude dumb species, we started off just burning stuff that was laying around because it worked. Now we're figuring out how to get by without burning stuff. And once we tap into the sun, which is inexhaustible and clean, there's no end to the runway. There's no end to the expansion ahead of us, the possibilities ahead of us. So doubling down on growth, basically, like this is how we reach the next phase of growth. If we want to desalinate the oceans, or, turn deserts into arable land, or go to Mars, or any of these sort of grand visions you may have for humanity, you can't do that on fossil fuels. You just can't. Physically, you just can't. Like, there aren't enough. If you really want to like 10x the amount of energy that humanity uses, and that's what it means to truly like to the future and beyond, you can't do that on fossil fuels. Like, there aren't enough available, and even if they were, you just burn your burn your nest up to a cinder. So if you want a big, bright sci-fi future for humanity, we gotta figure out different ways of powering ourselves. And so those two sort of contrasting impulses: do you respond to climate change by shrinking, or do you respond to climate change by doubling down on innovation and growth and cooperation, etc.? That is a split in the environmental movement, and it's a split in the broader culture as well. I think people outside the environmental movement are very glib about casting all enviros as sort of like dippy, pastoralists. It's not true. They're like, I talk to these people all the time, for my pod, and like, they're smart people who live in the modern world, and you know what I mean. That they're not reading different things, and you're not involved in some other culture than you. They're seeing the same things you're seeing. So, but that is a real tension, and I think it's a tension in lawmakers' heads too. And the reason I have come around to the second perspective, I would just say, is just, among other things, degrowth, that impulse, the impulse of like, let's dial back and do less. I just don't think that is in the cards for humanity, however much you might deem it the right thing to do, or how much you might want it. I just don't think it's all our impulses, all our systems, everything is geared against that. So it's like, our only choice is to like, the only way out is through, I think. And also, if politicians here's a problem, the solution is less of things that your constituents like, they don't want to hear that, and they will find some way to not hear it or not care about it, as we've seen over the last 20 years of really spectacular examples of cognitive dissonance and just idiocy, and everything. They'll reject it if that's the answer. So just to get action going and accelerating, I think you got to get it in politicians' head that like, no, this is like all the big things you want, the more, the prosperity, all this that you want. We've got to go. This is the only route to it. This is the only pathway to it, is clean energy. I don't even remember your question.
No, I mean, it was a great breakdown. I guess in response to that, I would say I'm probably more, I mean, not probably, I am more amenable to the degrowth camp in the long term, which is to say, I do believe that no matter what, degrowth is going to happen whether we ramp into it or not, simply because greenhouse gases are not the only issue we're talking about here. We're talking about ocean currents. We're talking about biodiversity loss, like soil desertification, like a lot of things that technology can intervene, but not nearly at the efficiency that the ecosystem services of nature currently can. So I think thinking of like the way that, from what I hear from those two camps, is like maybe using green growth as the like optimistic vision and the directionality to get people in the mindset of thinking differently about this broader question of growth and consumption, and that ultimately I do think
Well, the
we're probably
question,
going to land.
what it all comes down to, which of these two perspectives you adopt, it all comes down to whether you think, you know, prosperity or growth intrinsically involves waste, basically like converting resources with energy or nutrition or whatever in them into useless waste. Or whether the other way of putting it is whether we can decouple. Maybe people have heard this phrase. Right now, prosperity is pretty tightly coupled to fossil fuel use. Like that graph is that holds everywhere. You know, there's no point in denying that. Right now, the way to get prosperous as fossil fuels has been. So the question is, can you continue the prosperity line up and to the right as the fossil fuel line goes down and eventually zeroes out? Like, can you, and not just can you decouple growth from fossil fuel energy, can you decouple it from physical waste? Right? So there is, and I don't know. No one knows. No one, everybody's speculating. No one knows what we can do in the future. Like, we're very clever. We're very, very clever. We've solved a lot of problems that a lot of people said we couldn't solve. That very perspective you're just articulating, like, people had that perspective decades ago, and for the most part, we've thought our way out of most of disasters. Like, maybe we can only tap dance so long, but who really knows in the long term? But there is a vision out there of, like, to me, and this is one of the things I try to catch people's imagination with. People need more imaginative hooks to think about the future. Like, all of this discussion has been much too backward looking. But imagine a solar panel just laying there. It's got no moving parts, right? It's just sitting there. The photon comes down, knocks an electron off. The electron passes through the wire, goes into our electronic device, flips some switch, displays something to us, and we learn something. So value has been created without any moving parts or waste heat or inefficiency. Do you know what I mean? Like, and both the solar panel and the battery it's attached to and the electronic device I'm holding, there is the possibility, technically possible, that all of those things could be constructed in such a way that 100% of the materials in them are recycled and reused. So you get the much discussed famous closed loop, where you're not drawing any new raw resources in. You've got enough metals, you've got enough materials in the stuff. You just keep recycling and reusing it. So you can see in the distance the possibility of wealth, because that's what all wealth is like create, taking natural resources and transforming them into value. You can see a way that wealth could increase without any increase in without any increase in waste or damage. Like, you can see it. It's possible. Like, obviously a hugely open question whether a species as dumb as ours can actually get there, or whether we can pull that off. But there's a vision out there of wealth and prosperity with endlessly abundant clean energy fueling it, and material basically flatline stasis, endlessly recycled materials. And then if you do that, you could do one of these grand environmental visions, like set aside half the earth for rewilding or whatever. You know what I mean? If you could, one of the things people don't understand is how freaking wasteful human society is now. And not just like, when people hear that, they think, oh, like people are carelessly throwing things away. I was like, no. When it's working like it's supposed to, it's incredibly wasteful. Like, one of the statistics that blows everybody's mind in my world and somehow has not gotten out into the broader world is, of the raw energy that enters the US economy, 2/3 of that energy is wasted as waste heat. Because anytime you power anything with combustion, most of the energy in the combusted material goes up into the atmosphere as waste heat. You're just getting a little bit of that energy. So, like, 2/3 of the energy that goes into the economy is wasted. That's mind blowing. And so, if you electrify, right, an electric motor is much, 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 much more efficient than any sort of combustion motor. So, right there, if you switch to electricity, you eliminate the target you need to hit is only a third, right? Because it's only a third of the energy that's actually being used. So if you electrify, you only need to come up with a third of the raw energy you had, because you're not wasting that 2/3. So just even if we didn't insulate anything or think at all about trash, or even if our behaviorally we didn't give a shit, just by switching from fossil fuel combustion to electricity, we get a 2/3 jump in efficiency. So right there, you're eliminating a huge category of waste with zero reduction in wealth or lifestyle or comfort, et cetera, et cetera. And there are tons. I mean, and the physical waste is even worse. Like the amount of just like useless waste, because we've never really systematically had to care about it. Once we start systematically caring about it, who knows what's possible? So all of this is just like waving my hands, like I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows really what's possible in the future. But I think a vision of growth and prosperity with cleanliness and good health, like that's gonna motivate people and motivate politicians a lot more than like, oh, you don't need all the things you have, like, oh, what if you just read a book instead, like you're never going to be able to sell that. You're never going to be able to sell that, I think. So just pragmatically, I think we should, and all the people in the world, there are still many of them who have no access to hardly any energy, no access to almost any material wealth. They deserve good lives. So, I just think that like talk about shrinkage is just begging for intense backlash. I mean, you get the intense backlash almost regardless, but if you really are open about that, then you're really going to screw yourself.
Mm, mm. Well, I feel like this is a very nice segue into thinking about, like, you talk to all these different people across the energy transition, climate tech, utilities, grid infrastructure. So one thing I was really excited to ask you that I think we're segueing into very nicely is, what's your kind of like state of the union? Like, where are we at getting toward that big vision that you're outlining?
Yeah, that's with a picture this big and complicated, any reduction or map you draw of it is necessarily going to leave out a lot of stuff, obviously. But I will just say I guess they're now calling the electro-tech revolution, which is basically in the long term, the elimination of combustion from human life. That is, I think we can say now, without doubt, underway and inevitable. Like that's because not because of climate change, not because of any sentiment, moral sentiment. Electricity is just better. It's just better. Electrical devices are just better. It's better to not have asthma than to have it. Like these are just better. You don't have to bring morality into it at all. Like I say all the time, one of my lines I say all the time is just all the science on particulate air pollution, just normal, traditional air pollution that we've known about from community. The science on that has been proceeding, and every little bit we learn is like, it's worse than we thought. Like worse than we thought, worse than we thought, worse than we thought. Having larger, deeper, more long-term effects than we thought. There is no safe dose, just like all the science points in the same direction. So I always say the shift from combustion to clean electricity would pay for itself many times over just on the health benefits of reduced air pollution. You don't have to bring climate change into it at all. It's 100% justified. Furthermore, take climate change out of the picture, take air pollution out of the picture, just on the economics. It's it's more efficient, it's better, it performs better, it's more precise, it's more controllable. Like, everything around us is getting digital. People see this happening. Everything is being controlled by ones and zeros very precisely. And then over here you have the electricity grid, which is still, a lot of people don't appreciate, a lot of manual switches, and it still operates by like people calling each other on the telephone, like there's a wire down, you know what I mean? And like driving to play, like it's still very analog. I think people will be surprised living in a digital world that the power system that lies beneath all that stuff is still weirdly kind of analog and manual. So just digitizing energy is going to create opportunities to do things that we can't even really like think of now. Like we don't even know what they look like now, but like the ability to control energy down to the sort of electron level, the same way we control information down to the byte level, is there's gonna be some mind-blowing stuff that comes out of that that we cannot currently anticipate. So all of it's underway. The question is just the speed. Of course, always the question is the speed relative to the speed of climate change. This is always, this is always haunting us. Every update like this I've ever heard in my life is just like, good things are happening, but not fast enough. That's just like that's always the answer. So the world is converting. And one of the things I think is really interesting now that people need to sort of update their priors on is one of the kind of bits of conventional wisdom, call it a decade ago, 15 years ago, was that yes, China is electrifying quickly, faster than any other country in the world. But look, they burned a shit ton of coal to develop this economy that they're now greening. So all these other non-China developing countries, Vietnam, et cetera, they're going to have to go through that too, which means, and if that's true, then we're all just hosed because if they all develop along lines that are as carbon intensive as the way China developed, we are all hosed, period, full stop. But the other possibility is leapfrogging, right? This is a notion that's been around for many, many years. The analog is always phones, right? These developing countries did not bother with a physical phone infrastructure. They just jumped from no phones straight to cell phones, did not go through the analog phone step. They leapfrogged. Hope has always been they'll do the same on energy. To date, that's mostly been dismissed as kind of a hippy-dippy, dreamy thing, but it is happening. Look out in the world. It is happening. Pakistan imported enough solar panels from China in the past 2 years to supply 40% of its total energy burden in 2 years, and no one told them to do that. The government of Pakistan had nothing to do with that. The power utilities in Pakistan had nothing to do with that. That was entirely ground level individual decisions by a farmer who needs some frickin' power, and there's a cheap panel, and so he buys it, and then he's got power. Like, boom, that's happening. You're seeing that incredible up and to the right line in Pakistan, in Vietnam, in Brazil. Like, leapfrogging is actually happening. So like China's doing it, the non-China developing countries are doing it, Europe's doing it. who's not on that list? So it is, there's something very sort of like if this were a drama, if this were a play, this would be a very dramatic turn for the biggest, most powerful, richest country to basically take a left while everybody else is taking a right. And this is the Trump vision. This is the fascist vision. We have the remaining fossil fuels. they've convinced each other that this transition is going to take a long time. There's going to be a lot of fossil fuels dug up and sold in the interim. We're going to sell those fossil fuels. We're going to basically, and we're going to put up walls and keep out immigrants. This is basically the brown response to climate change as opposed to the green one, right? Like we've all seen this coming for a long time. Like eventually the fascists are going to be like, fine, climate change is real. Let's respond by building walls, keeping out immigrants, digging out every little last bit of fossil fuels we can get our hands on while people are still buying them. Basically, just like the psychos response to a collective action problem. Like, fuck all y'all, I'm gonna get mine while I can. Like, good luck solving this. That's how those people are. So, but even in the U.S., like, the solar panels are cheap. They're cheap here too, even though we're keeping the China panels out. They're cheap here too. It's easier. Batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper. Solar's just growing out like crazy. EVs are growing like crazy. Like the only reason we're as slow on EVs as we are is because we have kept Chinese EVs out. Like the same thing is true of solar panels, of EVs is true of solar panels. Like China's making them very good and very cheap. And so they're spreading like crazy. And so, we're the U.S. is very much in a putting its thumb in the dike situation now, holding back tides that are inevitable. But we can hold them back, like depending on what happens here politically, we can hold them back a long time. We can screw ourselves and a lot of other people in the process of this. Like I think it's inevitable, but we do have it in our power to make it take much, much longer and involve much, much more suffering. But I do think that because this has, I mean, it's been a delight to watch because, like, culturally, these people in DC can't update their priors. They're so slow, so they still are thinking of climate change as a hippy dippy lefty starving kids in Africa thing. Meanwhile, all around them, the business community is like moving and adopting these things. And it must be just so confusing for the Trumpies, right? Because they've convinced themselves that all this stuff is junk. They've convinced themselves that China is manufacturing it and foisting it on other countries as kind of like sabotage, but like they're not doing it, which of course, like this is what he said to the UN. And like everybody in that room in the UN knows that China has installed more wind power than any other country in the world. He's just like deranged ranting. So like, it must be so confusing for these people to like real people like governments and businesses and big important people in suits are doing this stuff that's a hippy dippy silly nonsense that doesn't work. Like, I often wonder how they deal with cognitive dissonance on various and sundry subjects, but on this particularly, like, why do you think the whole world, like, you think the whole world has been fooled on this, and you guys, this collection of Fox News hosts and podcasters that we have running things now, you guys have seen through and pierced the illusion, and everybody else is confused. Does that seem plausible to but I don't know. I don't know. Who knows what they think, but like it's happening all around them. And businesses know that. The US car companies know that if they tie themselves to gas vehicles in the long term, they're screwed. US manufacturers know that heavy industry is electrifying and that right now, so like China like dominates solar panels. They got that. They own that. It's almost too late. Like and they're in the midst of dominating batteries, but there are still some other technologies that we need that are not fully developed that we could take the lead on, but China's moving right for those too, and we're sacrificing our chances. We're just becoming like they seem to be deliberately trying to make us a backwater. And so the question is there enough spine in civil society and in the business community that someone will stand up and say, we will not let you drag our entire country into backwater status? Is there enough counterforce? Is there enough life left in American society to do this? Like, once upon a time, I would have said yes, but like, watching Trump and his people trample through our institutions, trample our government, trample our norms with so little resistance, with so little, it's very disheartening. So I've had to sort of update my priors, like maybe he can drag us into global backwater, rogue state allied with Russia, rump of the freaking world. Like maybe he can. Like maybe we're so social media addled and confused by our distorted information environment and lazy, and we take all the good things we have for granted because the last people who actually had to work at them and build them are dead. We're just like petulant, spoiled. So maybe he can, but that's the question. So like the question of what happens to the US is independent. The larger question of the electro-tech revolution that's overtaking the world, that's underway, accelerating all the time. And I will just say, at every single stage from the beginning, electrotech, meaning your solar panels, batteries, wind, and all the demand side stuff, the digitization of homes and businesses, all that stuff, it has moved faster than the very important people project it to move every time, at every stage, at every, every macro, micro, wherever you look, it's moving faster than anyone said it would. And it's funny, you think like after 25 years of being behind, of underestimating how fast this is going to go, you'd think the modelers, the projectors would be like, perhaps we should update our, but it's just, there's something in the psychology, the sociology of it is just much safer to be conservative than it is to, you know what I mean? Like, so no one, like if you go back to like the early 2000s, no one projected the growth of solar anything close to what actually happened except for Greenpeace, which was not even really using a sophisticated model. It was just like, what if it keeps growing like it's growing? They were the only ones. Greenpeace were the only ones where it occurred to them. It's just like, well, what if what's been happening keeps happening? What'll happen then? And like, what will happen is what has happened. But like every other forecasting group, the International Energy Agency, the Energy Information, all of them, the McKinseys, all these, they're all like projecting solar to plateau. You see the line year after year, they project a plateau and it doesn't happen. So it's delightful in that sense, in that a good thing is happening. It's on the loose, it's running wild, and all the very important people in suits are just sort of gaping and blinking and don't know why or how, and it's just happening regardless of them, no matter how much they talk it down, no matter how, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's escaped containment. This is what I mean by the Pakistan story. Like, people want energy that they can control, right? They want it. And if it's available, they're going to get it. And you're not going to be able to stop them no matter what your policy is. So it is happening, I guess, is the shorter answer to your question.
Boom. I love a dose of optimism, even if we're the butt of the joke inside of the optimism. Well, that kicks up a few things for me, but I want to double down on maybe something that feels more frivolous, but I don't mean it as such. I remember when Pete Hegseth first started saying, like, we don't do climate change anymore. And the comedy of that, of like, the military has historically been quite alert to the threat of climate change, in part because, hey, where are all the Navy bases located? Like, sea level rise impacts you directly. So my question to you is this: are they actually that dumb? Or are they, or do you think it's an agenda? Like, it's a short-term gain by doubling down on fossil fuels. They really do kind of know.
I know what you mean. Like, unfortunately, all of us have been forced into this position where we're constantly like trying to chart the intellect and the psychology of some of the world's most stupid and broken people. We've all been forced to become experts on them. God, I wish I could just never think about these people ever again. You know what I mean? But like, my impression, like, there is a certain faction of people who, I'm sure you've heard from them, who want to say there are guys behind the guys who have the real agenda and are running things and are spending the money, and all of these people are just puppets, and all of this is just circus. And, that's just not plausible to me. Like, one of the things you really see up close as a journalist, if you do it long enough, is just like almost everybody's incompetent. No, almost nobody knows what they're doing. The idea that you could coordinate some globe-striding cabal, it's just like, it's utterly implausible. These people are fucking morons. I've been looking for 25 years now for the smarter guys behind the dumb guys who are telling me things. There are no smarter guys. There's nobody back there. It's dumb, Fox News addled right-wing drones all the way down. There is no secret depth. There is no hidden room. There's no room behind the room. What you see is what you get. And I realize that's horrific. It's almost more comforting to think that there is some room of people who actually know what's going on and are actually in control of things. Even if they're evil, it's very, we'd like to think that somebody has their hands on the wheel. I don't think they do. Like, if you ask me to diagnose like somebody like Hegseth, is different. The conservatives of my earlier career were different because there used to be a thing called the mainstream media, and it used to be quite dominant, and right-wing media was fringe and seen as fringe. So people on the right had to learn to pass. They had to learn to speak normal people language, right? You go on right-wing radio, you speak right-wing language, but then you come on CNN, you put on your suit, you furrow your brow, and you speak normal, like civilized language. You have to learn to pass if you're trying to smuggle that into that. But what's happened is we have a generation now, or maybe even we're in like the second generation or third, of people who came up 100% in that bubble. Like, to them, there's no longer any particular need to pass before mainstream media. Mainstream media has shrunk and shrunk, and it's practically a rump now. Like, right-wing media is media. You can live your whole life never leaving that bubble. Like, you know what I mean? And they never do. So what I think they used to have a little bit of separation from what you might call the Fox News cinematic universe, that whole sort of like elaborate backstory of lies and fantasies that they're all living in, that's just like endless. They used to have some separation from that, but the people on the right now grew up in that bubble. They don't know that there's a world outside it. They don't know, like, these people 10 years ago were just calling Democrats satanic pedophiles as a rhetorical gambit to like make people hate Democrats. But I don't think they really thought the Democrats were like satanic pedophiles. Now we have a generation of right-wingers who came up in the bubble, and they've never heard anything about Democrats other than that they are satanic pedophiles. Like, they don't know otherwise. They don't know. And they live in media. They're on the radio, they're watching TV, they're on social media. All that is their lives now. It's more real to them than their real lives. So they are, like, the sense I get from like Hegseth is he is such a pure creature of right-wing media that in his mind, what he's doing, life, politics, is just the battle on the screens. You just say whatever gets you the clicks on the screens, gets you on more screens, gets the other people on screens to say nice things about you. You say whatever makes that happen, right? The idea that out there beyond the screens, there's a world with people, real people in it, and like things that are happening independently of the screens. I genuinely think they've just kind of lost touch with that. You never see an awareness with Hegseth that there is anything other than what's on TV. That's why they're all obsessed with whether generals are fat or not, or whether they, you know what I mean? Like, whether the soldiers look right, like they're out of central casting. If all you know is the screens, then all the military is to you is a certain kind of picture on a certain kind of screen. And so all you care about in terms of the military is making them look the way you think they ought to look on the screen. The idea that there's a world where military actually has to do things and accomplish things and like, just the whole idea that there's a reality outside of screens. I feel like all of them have lost that. They're just living, like if you saw Pam Bondi testifying to Congress today, you really get that vibe of her. Like, there's just no awareness that any of this is real, that there are real people involved, that there are real lives being affected by any of this. It's all just like, who owns who? Who's, who owns who gets clipped and shown on Fox News lately. That's all there is to it. There's no secret manipulative second, you know what I mean? It's just these people are just vapid idiots. All they want is to get on more screens. That's all any of them want. And they've set up an incentive structure where any grifter with no principles can look at that and be like, ooh, I can get on screens via this. And all I have to do is say extreme things. Say things that are more extreme than the last person said. That's it. I don't need any real knowledge of anything. I don't need any real skills or experience. I don't need to talk to other humans in the real world. You know what I mean? All I need to do to get on more screens is say louder and crazier stuff. And like, anybody can do that. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like what is she but a person who says crazy things? It's not like she knows anything. She hasn't done anything. There's nothing about her other than her willingness to say crazy things. And that's how she got where she is. And all the other people all the other grifters are like, that's way easier than like, trying to cheat people out of their social security or whatever. All these other grifts, like, this one looks super easy. I just got to get on a camera and be crazy. And all the other cameras will come to me and they'll elevate me. Like, look at this. Who is it? Riley Gaines, the swimmer girl. I don't know if you followed this, but like the girl who came in fifth or whatever in her swim meet and whoever came in third was the trans girl. And so now she's become one of these. And you just see in her, like, there's an emptiness. There's a need for ego reinforcement. There's a need to be the center of attention, to be looked at. And Riley Gaines realized that, like, if I've stumbled into a position where I look like a victim of one of these hated groups and I can ride this. And she has ridden it all the way to fame. Like, she's famous and rich now. For what? Just being willing to say crazy shit on Fox News, literally nothing else. Like, it's wild to me. So to come back to your question, I don't think Hegseth, not only does he not know that there are actual Navy bases out there in actual places where the water is actually rising and like physically that can't go on. It's not that he doesn't know that. He doesn't even know to ask that question. He doesn't have a mental category for placing that stuff. You know what? That's not on the screens. So like, it's not in his world, like literally. So that's not a comforting answer, but I really think that that's it. There's nothing more than what you see. It is all as puddle deep as it appears.
Baudrillard is down in his grave is sort of screaming, "The Gulf War never happened."
I mean, all these. I mean, I always feel like what's going on now. If you could like drag a Foucault up or a Baudrillard or all these guys who had the theory of the spectacle. Who is that guy?
Guy Debord, yeah.
All these guys. If you could show them what's happening, it's so like it seems implausible, right? Like the reality seems implausible right now. They're like I expected something like this, but not this. Like, this is like crazier and dumber, I think, than even the most sort of like daring thinker would have put to paper.
Well, and I love that you brought up Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's actually like an Ouroboros. It's like she's now so crazy that she's saying things like we shouldn't be killing children in Gaza and we need to release the Epstein files, which is like so crazy it became sane type of thing.
Yes,
that's been a truly mind-breaking thing to watch.
Yeah, you can't always, if these people have no center and there's nothing real, they're just chasing screens. That's to some extent, that's you can't really control that. Some of them are going to go, some of them are going to go off in weird directions. This is the beauty of right wing media, is it's built this giant machine to channel all those people in a single direction. Like they're all whatever their own idiosyncratic interests, they will all reliably shit on Democrats. And that's all right wing media has always been about, is not saying that Republicans are good or not arguing on behalf of conservative policy. It's always been Democrats are Satanists. So no matter what we do, it's not that bad, right? Even if we pull off a coup, even if we like send federal troops to streets and are grabbing people off the street, it's not that bad, right? It's not as bad as a global satanic pedophile ring. That's what right-wing media is for, is to insulate these people. So, everything comes back to the information environment, as I say over and over again.
Yes, indeed. Well, I still want to get to some kind of actually like wonky energy stuff, but one more thing on the politics front. You on Twitter had reposted this piece about reactionary centrists, and
great piece.
I was really drawn into that post, and I wanted to kind of have you kind of restate the argument of that piece, but also why that piece felt relevant as something you wanted to share out.
And you say you want a short answer on this.
It doesn't have to be short.
I think reactionary centrism is one of the most important political tendencies going on today, and it's very important for people to understand it. The last 10 years have been like, you can't understand the last 10 years of U.S. politics without understanding that. So here's the basic idea. When you're young, you are open-minded and progressive, along with all the other bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young students going into the Ivy Leagues. As we said about Democrats, they're all A students now. You go in, you're like, yes, racial equality, blah, 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 blah. Then you grow up, you become invested in the system, the status quo. It gives you your salary, your credentials, your status. All of a sudden, like, the way things run, the system becomes like, you start to think like, yeah, it's a pretty good and sensible system, and then the next wave of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young lefty students comes along, pushing things forward again. And all of a sudden you find yourself saying, well, look, no, like the progressive impulses of my generation made sense. Like, that's good progress. But this stuff these kids want today, too far, too much, right? And you see, like, I've lived long enough now to see multiple generations of pundits start in the first place and end up in the second place very visibly. And so you constantly have this set of pundits in U.S. media who are purportedly on the left, purportedly Democrats, but who spend basically all their time irritated with the left, scolding the left, telling the left that they're doing it wrong, and above all, pointing to things that the right does and saying to the left, look what you made the right do with your silly slogans and your dumb protests, and you're just doing it all wrong, and you're making the right do these crazy things, right? So it's like you will say you're a Democrat in that you believe generally in racial equality and all and a fair economy, all this kind of stuff. But in practice, your role is to tell the other VSPs, very serious people, the people invested in the system, the people with the fancy jobs, the people with the suits, the people around you, these young people coming up on the left, calling out your conscience, calling upon your conscience, yelling at you, accusing you of being conservative, accusing you of being reactionary, you who spent your whole life thinking of yourself as a young liberal. That ego injury is so, you cannot overstate it. Like, so many people around US politics these days have made their entire personality around being offended and outraged and aghast that they've been accused by a bunch of ranting lefties on social media of not being a good liberal, of not being liberal enough. Like, and it injures their self-image, injures their ego. Like, so one thing you could do, one way to react to that might be like some introspection. Like, I've seen all these generations ahead of me get old and crusty and start pushing back against change and start defending the status quo. And I rightly condemned them. I wonder if that's happening to me. I wonder if I'm involved in that. I wonder if I should step back and maybe instead of picking at these kids about the way they talk or the exact language of their slogans or the exact things they're protesting or when or how they protest, maybe I should just look at what they're trying to say and consider whether, even though it makes me uncomfortable, that discomfort is not cosmic. It doesn't indicate that they're wrong. It just indicates that I've been trained to think otherwise and I need to like step back and think again. No one reacts that way. No one. It's so disappointing. Everyone, it's like you see it from pundits, you see it from like comics, like Dave Chappelle. I don't know if you've traced his evolution, but basically like he was just doing stand up, telling jokes, would say something offensive about trans people, and then the young trans activists would come yell at him and characterize him as a bigot. And it was so that injury to his ego was so deep that he has reoriented his entire fucking life around being an enemy of trans people now. Like, he's doubled down on it all. He's going to Saudi Arabia to talk to people who cut up journalists about free speech, telling them in Saudi Arabia how bad he's got it in America, not because any government told him he couldn't say anything, not because he faced any real consequences. He's still rich, he's still on stage, but just because some young kids yelled at him. And that to him is like the worst, like that is tantamount to crushing free speech. All these guys, and it's mostly guys and their egos, all these guys have decided that if I say something and people respond by yelling at me and shunning me, that's a violation of my free speech. But like, no. That is free speech. That is the people you're talking to exercising their free speech. Like, it's only a violation of free speech if the government comes in and tells you. So now, of course, like, anyway, the reason these people bug me so much, the reason I think they're so important is because A, they've come to completely dominate the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, like all the major quote unquote liberal institutions are dominated by these people who spend their days stewing about the left, even as the fascists are in the fucking streets kidnapping people. They're still worrying about kids on the internet yelling at them. That is like the worst thing in the world to them. But the larger point is, I think if you go back and look at historical examples of democracies that slid into authoritarianism in various ways, there are patterns, there are recurring patterns, very distinct, and we are walking through the script in the most flat-footed, just obvious, like we're just playing all, you know what I mean? It's not even a variation. We're just doing the dumbest, most obvious version of the walk towards, but always a big dynamic. And like, go back to Germany in 1930s, just to go right to the heart of the cliche. Like, what you saw is the center-left party convincing itself that the lefties were more dangerous to them than the fucking Nazis. And so they spent all their time scolding the left and trying to create political alliances with people on their right to fend off people to their left, and convincing German society that the real threat, right? I mean, it sounds crazy on its face to come say, you know what? The real threat to you is not the people with guns or the people with money. It's the professors and the queers and the immigrants. It's all the weakest, most marginalized groups in society. They are the real threat to you. It's just like, it's so crazy on its face, but like, it's very compelling. People believe it. And so, because people have been convinced that the professors and the queers are a looming threat to their life, they don't guard against the right, and the right takes over. And like that basic dynamic of the center left facing left and scolding left rather than guarding against the fascists coming from the right. You see it in Hungary, in Turkey, like all these, it's always the same. And so, if you've read a fucking history book, if you've read a history book and you've seen this pattern play out over and over again, and then it comes to your country, do you want to, like, this is what I wonder about these people when they look in the mirror at night, like, this is the role that I've chosen to play in this drama that has played out again and again the same way over and over again. There's always these people. I'm going to be one of them. I'm going to be one of the people who tries to convince America that voluntary suggestions from the HR department about how to talk about pregnant people are just as bad, if not worse, than people with guns on the street kidnapping you and throwing you into concentration camps. Like, we spent 10 years, like, we saw the George Floyd protests, right? We saw the Me Too thing. The backlash to that has been so intense and is still ongoing. And while we were all freaking ourselves out that women were coming to get us and the immigrants are coming to get us, we literally let fascists, we elected them. We elected fascists, and now they're taking over. So I have anger toward the fascists. I do not like them one single bit. But I have a rage and contempt toward reactionary centrists. They're almost worse, I think, because like the fascists can't mount a popular movement on their own because they're deranged, angry, violent people. And most people aren't like that. Like that's like 25-30% of people, whatever, in any given group. There's a group of sort of like fear, giant amygdala, fear-based, reactionary, fundamentalist, whatever you want to call them. But they can't bring people to their side on their own. They need the help of these people in the center. It's the people in the center who clear the way, who clear the path for the right to take over again and again. So like, how can you just act that out, be that person, be the pundit who's like, you know why fascists have taken over? It's because in 2020, like 12 lefties on Twitter said defund the police. That's everything that happened since is because those darn lefties. And like, I'll stop ranting after this, but one more analogy, and I put this on Blue Sky the other day too, and I really think it holds. Anybody who's familiar with abusive households at the family level is familiar with a particular dynamic where dad is big, loud, full of rages, full of passions. He's like the weather. He's like a weather system coming through. So you don't say to the weather, hey, weather, be nicer. Or, hey, weather, consider your own behavior. Self-reflect, weather. You know what I mean? Like, or you don't even hold weather responsible for weather. What would it even mean to do that? Weather just is, right? So then who has agency? Who's making actual choices? Mom, right? So all that anger and trauma that the kids feel, they can't direct it towards dad. He has no agency, right? He's not making choices. He just is like the weather. So all of it gets channeled towards mom. Mom, why did you make him mad again? Why didn't you clean up? Mom, like, why do you say the wrong things, Mom? Why are you saying things wrong? Why did you do this wrong? Why are you setting him off again, right? Because she's got agency. She's a person making choices, and so it's responsible. But he is not. And this is very familiar dynamic in abusive families, I think. And I think it is very, very straightforwardly playing out on the national level, where Republicans are dad and Democrats are mom. I'm not the first. I'm not the first to come up with this analogy. We've all read our George Lakoff back in the 2010s. But like the mommy party and the daddy party, I really think that's true. Like the way pundits and commentators talk about Republicans, they just are, right. This is just how they are. They're treated like a force of nature, like a natural object that just exists. And so who's expected to navigate around them, to persuade them, to soothe their rages, the Democrats are mom. Like, what did you do to set dad off this time, right? And that's basically the punditry of 2023 to 2025 has basically been like, there you go. You demanded a little bit more race. You demanded racial equality. You demanded gender equality. You tried to address, economic inequality, and now look what you did. You went and made him mad. You have only yourself to blame. You know what I mean? The dynamics of an abusive household are so straightforwardly replaying themselves on the national level right now. It is like a psychodrama. It would be fascinating if I was not stuck inside it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for that. You called it a rant. It's more just like an impassioned exegesis.
I think that's a nicer way to.
Yeah. But I just to build on it just a little bit. One, I saw this play out so acutely, and I don't even know if he to this day understands the irony. Did you see the tweet that Bill Maher put out?
No. Speaking of reactionary centrists, like your mind went right
exactly.
to him. He is paradigmatic.
He's the poster. Yeah, he's the poster child. So, and I also realized, did you see the Bill Maher tweet? It's like, God, which one? The one I'm talking about is he said something to the effect of like, okay, now can we all agree that the lefty scolds took wokeness a little too far, and folks on the right can admit that they're sliding towards authoritarianism. And it's like, as if that's like, it perfectly betrays the reactionary centrism of like, oh yeah, sure, those are two pretty equal harms. And let's
he's a classic guy where people said mean things to him, and you can't, if you're a guy with a giant ego, for some reason, you can't just say, oh, these people don't like me. Oh, well, I'm going to move on with my life, right? You can't just say, that annoys me. I find them annoying, right? You've got to make your annoyance a capital I issue, right? It's got to be something that's facing the nation today, because you look petty if you just go out whining and yelling that a bunch of kids yelled at you online. You look like a petty, thin-skinned, egotistical dipshit. But if you say the kids these days are ruining the country and they've, the woke mind virus, you blow it up into this big national thing, then it sounds something serious. But like, you just poke at it a little bit, like, yeah, the left should admit that like its HR departments got out of hand. Like, its Ivy League professors said some silly things. Okay, I'll admit that. If they'll admit the fascism, I'm fine with that deal. Like, but in his mind, you're right. They are commensurate. So what's interesting happening right now, a really interesting thing going on right now, is there's all these reactionary centrists, right? It became like, Barry Weiss, who is now in charge of CBS News, she started the Free Press. The Free Press is basically the house organ of reactionary centrism. It is that distilled to its essence. So that world attracted a bunch of people. What you're seeing now is the right so theatrically and obviously crushing speech in a way that's not like ambiguous or that you have to tease out. You know what I mean? Like old school government says, no, you can't say that or I'll arrest you. Like old school, it's so clear now that that they don't give a shit about free speech, right? That all of that was bullshit. All of it obviously was bullshit. There are a few people in that reactionary centrist world who are observing that and being like, gosh, did I, am I the baddie? Like, did I usher this into existence? Did I help birth this by freaking out about what in retrospect seem like silly phantom threats from the left? Am I the baddie? Not many of them, but a couple of them. You're starting to see them be like, wait a minute. Like Joe Rogan is like, I didn't really want this, guys. I was like, thanks, Joe. Thanks for thinking it through. Joe Rogan, again, some kids yelled at him online, and he responded by making his whole personality yelling at lefty woke kids online. He made a whole empire out of it. And now he's looking around like, gosh, maybe, like it's just dawning on some of them. Exactly. So we'll see. Like I think some of them will see the light and back away and say, I was wrong. Obviously, like the wisdom of the ages, the ancient wisdom of Footloose, as I put it online, it's the preachers. It's always the preachers. It's always the fundamentalists who want to tell you how to behave and what you can and can't do. It's the right that wants to control you and suppress you. That's always been true. Somehow in the last 10 years, we've let this group of people convince us that college students and fucking trans people, like you could not pick a more rare, for one thing, scarce, for one thing, powerless, like it's comical. You picked literally the weakest group you could find in all of society and are trying to puff them up into the danger to all of us. It's ludicrous. Some of them will see that and back away, but I think a lot of them will just, the ego, the threat to your ego, sort of realizing that you have been played for a fucking dupe and have helped bring fascism to America. Their egos can't handle that, right? So they'll find some way to double down. So I think a lot of them are going to respond to this by going further right, by fully embracing MAGA. I think a lot of them are going to just flop over that way. But like reactionary centrism, I think, is like as attractive as it is, the hold it has on the elite class is coming in such obvious friction with reality that like it's just interesting to watch it play out.
Yeah. And maybe you can't talk about this, so I'll just say it, but like I actually am more depressed about the directionality of reactionary centrism than I am about the few apologists in the inverse when I look at something like Ezra Klein's Last Month, where it's like, oh shit, like we're going to start seeing the capitulators. You referenced earlier, the people who are so abstracted inside the game that there's no material consequence. Like, I think that's like an early warning indicator of what we're going to see, particularly folks that get hired at CBS. Or, I mean, God forbid, Jake Tapper is another early example of this. Like, yeah. So anyway, not to sort of pile doom on doom.
This is why the Jake Tappers of the world, like you just saw it. You saw it through Biden. Like they all can gain status and attention by being hard on Democrats, right? That's how they show the other journalists how brave and independent they are. But again, they don't do that to the right, because you can kick Biden all day long, and like the left hates him too, and mostly the center left hates him too. Like the right hates him, all the other reactionary centrists hate him. There's nothing safer in the world than crapping on Joe Biden. And that's why Jake Tapper has taken it on as his life's work. But like if you go up against the right, they yell at you, they yell at your boss, you get death threats, you get hundreds of emails and voicemails threatening death, threatening to kill you, telling you they know where you live. Like it has become genuinely scary to go up against the right. That would take real bravery. So none of them do that. So all you see, like, I've said this before, like, we've somehow ended up in a situation where it is to everybody's advantage to shit on Democrats, including Democrats. like the far left hates them because they're neoliberals and they've sold out socialism. The center left is all trying to show how I'm not a team player. I'm an iconic freethinker. And how do you show all the other people, all the other center leftists that that you're a freethinker is by crapping on your own side. They don't seem to notice that they're all crapping on their own side in unison, in the exact same language, in the exact same way over and over again. Like, they don't see that as hurting for some reason, So, like, the left shits on Dems, the center left shits on Dems. As I said, the entire media apparatus is built to shit on Dems. The right shits on Dems. And then even when you interview Dems, like, think about every Democrat who tries to set themselves apart and gain some attention and gain some advantage does so by saying, I'm not like the other Democrats, right? We all know Democrats are annoying, kind of dumb. I'm not like those other ones. So, like, even, like, I saw Brian Schatz, senator from Hawaii, who I think the world of, actually, I think is fantastic. But he was basically yesterday said, like, fascism is bad. We need to we need to stand up to this. But even in that tweet, the second to last sentence was like, sure, yeah, I know Democrats are annoying, but we need to focus on this now. Like, even protesting literal fascist takeover, you can't even do that without acknowledging on some level, yeah, we suck. So, like, every faction at every position in U.S. politics has incentive to shit on Democrats, and no one, zero people, have incentive to defend the party as such, right? You can find champions and say, oh, he's not like the other Democrats, AOC is not like the other Democrats, or like, Sanders not like the other Democrats. Who pick your individual, but no one is out saying, actually, rule of law is good. Like, racial equalities, great. Income inequality is bad. It's corrosive, just like basic democratic principles. Instead, the Democratic Party is defined for the public almost entirely by people who hate it, because everyone hates it. So no one, like, if you ask a person on the street, what is the Democratic agenda? They're going to tell you, like, oh, they want to put trans people everywhere, and they want to trans all our kids in school and teach all our kids that America is terrible and implement Sharia law. Just all this, like, bizarre, fantastical stuff that they've heard. And then I say, well, like, what would be a better heuristic for determining what is the Democratic agenda? I have an idea. Over in Tim Walz's state, a couple of years ago, for the first time, they got a Democratic trifecta. Democratic governor, Democratic control of the House, Democratic control of the Senate. So they got power. What did they do with it? That's a great way to determine what they want to do. Look at what they do. And it's amazing energy policy, amazing economic policy, child care, elder care, voting reform. No transing of kids, you know what I mean? No Sharia law, just very basic practical stuff that helps ordinary people. But for some reason, that evidence, what they actually do when they have power, no one cares about that. Instead, they believe a vision of the Democratic Party that they learn from deranged haters of the Democratic Party, rather than the reality. And the craziest thing, and then I'll shut up, even Democrats themselves seem more inclined to believe the picture of the party drawn by their enemies than they do believe their own eyes. I was like, when you look around at your colleagues, do any of them want to trans the kids? Like, do you see this around you? And yet you're accepting that the Democratic Party sucks because you see it on the screens, right? Because you see it on the TV. Like, you're living a different reality and you're accepting someone telling you that the reality you're living is fake and there's another reality and you're believing their fake reality. Like, we're all so in our screens that like reality doesn't matter anymore. Just only thing that matters is what's on the screens. And what's on the screens is the Democratic Party sucks.
Wow. Okay, so I had a lot of like yeah, as I said, like wonky sort of energy questions, but I feel like we've been talking a lot, and so hopefully I can have you back and get into a lot of those wonky energy questions.
Yeah, I
but
would.
I do have
I would love to. I'm sorry for you're triggering all my you're triggering all my
no,
rants.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it, and I think people really need to hear it. So I could not be happier with how it's going. I just also don't want to have a, speaking of Joe Rogan length conversation that takes up all your day. But there is one energy question that I do want to spend a brief moment on now, which
Sure.
is grid infrastructure. Like, I think that this is one of those things like,
love it.
what was that face?
Love it.
Great. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I've learned so much from Volts. And I think it's one of these kind of like boring, underlooked problems that you have such a keen perspective on.
Well, this is, I mentioned earlier that, I come out of philosophy and I like systems thinking. I like thinking about big systems. One of the great things that's happened, like when I first started writing about climate change, there basically was no solution set. So if you wanted solutions, you just sort of wave your hands and say, we should do something, or go march in the street. Now the solution set has come into being. The solution set is clear. So I've almost completely turned my attention. I hardly ever write about climate change anymore. I hardly ever talk about it anymore, really. I've almost completely turned my attention to this set of solutions. And it turns out there are really fun systems challenges there too. None more so than the US electricity grid. It is literally a system with like emergent properties, like all the stuff you love about systems. It's there in the electricity grid. So it's just fun to think about, for one thing. And the other thing is, what's happening is not just that electricity is getting better and cleaner, but that we're electrifying other things, right? So like we're accustomed to thinking of the natural gas system as its own thing over here and the electricity system over here. Or more to put a finer point on it, we're used to thinking of heat as one system and electricity as another system. What's happening is, as everything electrifies, everything's becoming one system, which means electricity, all the electricity stuff we associate with electricity, the usual electricity stuff, plus transportation is completely being electrified, buildings are completely being electrified, industry is being completely electrified, which means that like the electricity system and the transportation system are merging with the heat system. It's all becoming like what happens under the grid is it all becomes one system, which, anybody who's spent any time reading about systems or chaos theory or any of that nonsense, you will know that like increasing the size and complexity of the system will create affordances within it that we cannot now predict. Like there's going to be all sorts of cool stuff when you combine the heat system and the electricity system. What mutual efficiencies can you get out of that? You know what I mean? So like they're both very wasteful on their own, but like the waste of one is fuel for the other. So once you merge them, you get new possibilities, new efficiencies. And that is, the grid is that system. The grid is eventually going to be the energy system. So like how it's built, how it's run, how it's like physically how it's built is fascinating. How it's regulated and administered, believe it or not, is quite interesting and just like conceptually interesting. Like what's the best locus of control, right? And so another thing you see happening is the traditional grid was very top down, right? There's big power plants, and then you would transmit the energy via transmission lines to your local distribution system where it would be sent to your home and businesses, whatever. It's like a water trickling down from the source to the to the use of the water. Now, of course, everybody on the bottom of that system, all those businesses and households, are becoming infrastructure. They're generating their own energy, they're storing their own energy, and they're trading their own energy. So what you're seeing is conceptually the whole thing is flipping upside down, and we're shifting to a bottom up grid where local areas produce their own energy, and they only turn to the transmission system, those big power plants, as backup, not as their first resort, but as backup. So everybody's building up from the bottom. And like, what does that, how do you administer that? Because right now, all the regulatory bodies and governance and everything is built for this top-down system, right? And like the complexity at the distribution level is about to get crazy. Like, and we don't have really distribution level governing bodies to speak of. Like in the UK, they're creating them now, but in other places. But so we're going to have to govern it differently. But also, like, what's that going to open up in terms of local resilience? Like one of my favorite podcasts, Lorenzo Christov, it goes on and on about this. Like the bottom up grid is going to, like right now, local officials control sort of local transportation policy, local building policy, but local energy policy is dictated to them from large entities far away. This is going to put that in their hands too. And then how are transportation, local transportation and building and energy policy going to start melding and mixing and cross-pollinizing, right? And just give much more local control and much more local abundance, like abundance from the ground up. So it's both fascinating as a physical thing, like how do we build that such that it works well? It's a governance and regulatory challenge, like how do we update our institutions to best accelerate this and manage this? And then it's also socially and politically, I think, super fascinating to think about what's going to happen in America and in the world when more power, literal power and political power, devolves down to the local level, and we have bottom up power systems. What's going to happen geopolitically because right now, like, it's another thing I feel like is not very popularly appreciated, but like 80% of the world's countries are importing oil. It's 20% that are producing it. So there are way more consumers than there are producers. So there's a lot more people with incentive to get off oil than there are with incentive to keep it going. So what does it look like? Like the need for oil, basically, the need for energy has dictated geopolitics for modern history. Is basically all been about energy. Who has it? Like, why do we all care so much and have to pay so much attention to what goes on in Saudi Arabia? Like, why do we give a shit? There's only one reason, right? Like, why are our military bases where they are? Why are our allies who they are? On and on, all the way down. It's all built around basically energy, oil, and who's got it, and the flows of it, etc. What is going to happen when small countries become basically energy independent, when they are able to generate enough energy for their own economies and they don't need other countries? What is that going to do to geopolitics? I mean, it's going to, crazy internal U.S. politics is going to have an effect, but geopolitics is like, who can even speculate? Like, what's that going to, it's easy to sort of be utopian about it, be like, oh, it'll be like a world of peace. Everybody will have all their own energy. But I don't know if that, I mean, maybe it'll be worse. Maybe there'll be more war. I have literally no idea what that would look like, but it's going to be a huge change in human history for access to underground resources no longer dictating who has power and who doesn't. So then who will have geopolitical power in that world and why? And based on what? You know what I mean? Like, I really don't know, but man, what a fascinating time to be alive. And then, of course, like, how does that shift, which is occurring right now, this massive shift in energy, which is a massive shift in power, how does that interact with the acceleration of climate change that's going on right now with natural disasters and parts of the world becoming uninhabitable, et cetera, and refugee flows and immigrant flows. How does all that interact and come together? Like, people who write near future sci-fi these days, I just think are so brave. Like, how do you know? Like, I don't know if you saw the book The Deluge
Oh
by
yeah, yeah,
Stephen
yeah.
Barkley. I had him on my pod. I talked to him a good bit, and I was so brave what he did, because he really sat down. He's like, okay, starting now, how are things going to play out between now and the year 3000? And I was just like, God, I have no idea. I mean, I really have no idea. It could go any of fundamentally different directions. But like, we are, I mean, one of the problems right now, I think, in society, in American society, in global society, is that biologically, socially, evolutionarily, we are not well suited to constant change. We very much like, on a deep, deep psychological level, very much like and are attached to knowing how the world works and what our place is in it. Like, I had a psychologist on my pod, John Jost, who talks about system justification. That's what he calls it. There's self-justification, there's justification of your group or faction, but then there's also an impulse, and they've found this through experiments, to sort of justify the system you're placed in, even if you are on the ass end of that system, right? Like, even if you are on the bottom, even if you are among the oppressed class of that system, you find more comfort in at least knowing how things work than in uncertainty, right? This is one of the answers for why do people accept being put down and suppressed? Like, it has always been the case at every stage of history that the oppressors are fewer in number than the oppressed. Like, at any moment in anywhere in any global history, the oppressed could have, if they cooperated physically, taken down their oppressors. And yet, as he says, what calls out for explanation in history is not those moments where people did rebel, but those giant swaths of time, most of the time, when they were just being oppressed and they weren't rebelling. Why? And one of the reasons is this deep, deep need for an understanding of how things work and what our place is in the world. And people react very badly to not knowing, like, what kind of person am I? How do I relate to the people? And this explains a lot of what's going on in the US right now. It's just like, what kind of place are we? Like, who's in charge? Who has status? And who doesn't, and why? How do you get status? Like, you know what I mean? Like, everybody looks at the old white guys who are freaking out because the world is changing and we're not valuing the old white guy ways as much anymore. But it's just as true for everybody else. Like, no one knows how things work anymore, and that is so destabilizing at such a deep level, which explains, I think, a lot of the weird, irrational violence or self-destructive behavior you see all around you. Is just people don't know how, and my worry is that that's not going to get better. It's going to get, like, change is just going to accelerate. Like, things are going to get crazier and crazier. We're going to have less and less idea how things work. And I was just like, I worry that we're not, just our wetware is not suited to this, and we're going to react to this pace of change by flailing in the direction of irrationality and self-destruction on a mass scale. But again, who knows?
Well, I mean, there's a reason this is the, classic fertile ground for authoritarian strongmen, disoriented, bewildered, scared people.
And they want, and there's a reason the second they pop up, they work overtime to disorient you more and to undermine your trust. I mean, this is like, to me, this is the central question right now. Talk to social scientists. I did a post about this once. I talked to a bunch of them about social trust, basically. And basically, like, the state of the art in social science basically says, A, you can't do anything without it. Anything. You cannot do anything on a collective scale without some social trust. If you don't have social trust, you can't do anything. If you have it, you can do almost anything. How do you create it? We don't know. Who knows? Like, how does it come and go? Who knows? So, like, I think we can all identify with our eyeballs pretty clearly, pretty obviously, that in the US today, social trust is at a low ebb. Just the sense of like, we are in this together. We are a group. We are an us, right? What is the us? This is the us. We don't know who us is anymore. Like, so just at a fundamental level where grading on each other and grading on our own expectations. And so how do you create social trust in an environment where there's more and more uncertainty and dislocation? Because the natural course of events will be for trust to dry up, and that's when things like world wars happening. So I really think that everybody should be thinking, not just like social scientists, but everybody should be thinking of what proactive steps can we take to restore and build up social trust? Like, how can we be deliberate about it and try to do it rather than just hoping or lamenting that it's gone, you know? And this, I think, is the other side, in a sense, has identified this faster than we did. Like, they know social trust is exactly what they need to destroy. They need you to not know anything, not know who to trust, not know what's going on, because in that circumstance, you'll just be like, well, I'm just going to find the biggest kid on the playground and hide behind him. That's what they want. That's what fascism is. So they know social trust is important, and they're going right after it. Our side has taken it for granted, not appreciated it, not thought about it, and not been intentional about it. So that's what I would like everybody to take away from this. Just like, how do we build social trust? Because we're not going to do any of the grand things we want to do without it. We're not going to build a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy without a lot of social trust. So, like, we need to turn that ship around, and everybody has a hand in that.
Well, that is a perfect place to wrap up this part of the conversation. I have 3 recurring questions that I like to ask folks to close things off. Feel free to pull things back in that you've already said, or take it a totally different direction. What is one thing you wish people paid more attention to?
Electricity, the grid. Literally, electricity in the grid. Electricity is the organizing principle right now. Is electrification is the future, and so ordinary people. I mean, this is why I kind of like the climate movement. To sort of like, I've sort of given up on the idea that climate is going to motivate masses of people. I know people yell at me for saying that, but I just like, but I do think a bright future with tangible benefits can motivate people, and that's what electrification is. So I would like everybody to get on that train.
Amazing. What is one resource you recommend for making better sense of reality?
Not to be a cliche, but I just strongly recommend getting off your screens and connecting with local people in physical space where you are sharing pheromones, where you're being human in a way that we're forgetting how to do. I mean, this is like, I dropped my younger son off at college a couple of weeks ago. And this is just like this is a Pacific Northwest liberal arts school, so it's a selective group of kids, but just like my overwhelming impression of all the other freshman kids being shuttled around by their parents is they're just like pale and nervous. They're pale, nervous creatures. They look like they haven't been out of their rooms, off their computers ever. And like, so like their moms are shuttling them through Fred Meyer, and they're like little mice that are out in the field for the first time. It's just like, these kids are not prepared for life. So like, and it's true of everybody. Everybody's cooking their brains on their screens. Social media is cooking our fucking brains. Like, if you want a monocausal explanation of our current social breakdown, I think you could do worse than just saying social media. Like, it is really screwing everybody up. So, and there's a reason that the right identified those mechanisms the left has for getting people in rooms together physically. Liberal churches, unions, and they very deliberately targeted and tried to destroy both those institutions. Now, where's left where young liberals can get together physically? There's one place left: college. And guess what the right is doing now? Trying to destroy college. They know that it is very, like, there's a reason these Trump rallies, like, we watch them. We word lovers, we word people, we listen to the words and we're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, that, none of that makes any sense. Why are you all in a room together screaming about that? But we're missing, it's not the words, it is the being in the room together. That is the substance of it. That's what is revelatory to a lot of these Trump supporters. For the first time in their lives, they're in a big group of people who think like them. There's just nothing like that. It deepens their commitment. It just draws them into politics in a way that nothing abstract, nothing on your screen could ever do. And like, the left desperately needs to restore spaces where we can just gather and, like, yes, the words we say to one another in those spaces are important, but really just getting together physically is so important. So that's what I would say to everybody is, like, if you want to know what's going on in your community, go out into it and talk to people in physical spaces, like whatever that looks like for you. You know, it could be anything, but just like get off screens. Like, that's what I would say to Pete Hegseth too. Just like touch grass, you know?
Well, he wouldn't hear it because, you know, unless the cameras
unless
are
I got on the right screen, right?
Yeah. Amazing. And then finally, what is one moment when your sense of reality was disrupted?
2015 to present. 2015 dash. I mean, honestly, it's been one of the worst parts about it. Just for me personally, it's just like, this so violently doesn't make any sense. You know, it's just like, it hurts me. Like when Trump first ran in 2015, I was so certain that he was going to lose. I had no doubt. Like, the idea that he would win was so ludicrous and fantastical to me. It's not like something out of like a bad movie or like a cheap book or something. You know what I mean? Like, real life doesn't do that. You know, like, but then it did. And I guess I'll just say one thing as a more compact answer to this question. When I encountered Trump for the first time, I feel like you watch that guy talk for 60 seconds, a minute. And I mean, any minute from anything he's ever said anywhere in public ever, watch a minute of it and you know everything you need to know about that guy. Like, he is utterly transparent. It's all on the surface. And it is almost perfectly repugnant. It is repugnant. Like, this is the thing that blows my mind. It's just not like we disagree on this or that, but almost like somebody came down and scanned my brain and flipped it to the negative and like, here's literally everything that you hate. Tendencies, language, behavior, posture, like, name it, you know, like aesthetic, the songs he likes, like, it's bizarre, like, so perfectly repugnant to me. And the idea that anyone could watch him and find strength or inspiration, or the idea that, like, God that he's God's instrument is just so, like, it's so ludicrous to me. It's so outrageous to me that I still can't believe, like, to me, just like, you see Trump and this just like, oh, that's gross. I wouldn't hire that guy to fucking clean the floors in my business. Like, I wouldn't hire him to be a barista. I would not. No one would hire that guy. The guy walked into your business. You wouldn't hire that guy. You wouldn't let him watch your kids. You wouldn't let him teach at your school. So to find something in that you like it just revealed to me that I am a lot more different than most people than I had appreciated, which is not really always a pleasant feeling. You know what I mean? Like it turns out things that I thought were obvious and that we all agreed on are not obvious to people, and it turns out we didn't agree on them at all. It turns out, as a matter of fact, that almost everything we said we believed and almost everything we put forward as our values had become hollow and completely desiccated, and Trump just pushed through it all like tissue paper. There was nothing to it. There was no substance to it. No one really believed any of it. Just like, I feel so naive saying this, but like it was all a shock to me, and it's still a shock. Like every time I see him on TV, like it's just like, how, especially now, I just like, how is this not viscerally repulsive to everybody? I don't even know another way to put it. The same with like Hegseth. All these people are like, these are the grossest, most repugnant people. Like you've selected all and only the worst human beings in the country and elevated them as your heroes. And that's just so, I cannot imaginatively project myself into a headspace where that makes sense. And I don't like that. Like, I don't like the feeling that there are large swaths of my fellow human beings that are fundamentally alien to me and to whom I am fundamentally alien. I just don't like, a lot of us on our side, I think, got that shoved in our faces in the crudest, most violent way possible in the last few years. And it's unpleasant. It's and I still doesn't make any sense to me. So like, you know, who is it that did the comedy routine? I think it was David, or no, what did he went to France, wrote the book about being in France. Anyway, a comedian, and he was talking about being on a plane, and like the stewardess comes and says, you know, would you like the baked chicken or the broken glass in feces? And like, you know, and his point was like, you know, you might not like chicken. You know, the chicken might look a little overdone, but like if someone came along and said, I want the broken glass in feces, how would you persuade them that that's not a good choice, right? Like, I'm being serious here, though. Like, to me, the repulsiveness of broken glass in feces is self-evident. There's not some reason, you know what I mean? It's not a logical chain of reasoning that got me there. I just look at it and like, ah. And if you look at it and you don't say, how can I persuade you? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what the worldview is that yields, yes, I want broken glass in feces. I don't know what its premises are. I don't know like what its basic shape is. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like somebody who chose like chicken over steak, whatever, I can talk about the relative merits. But if someone's choosing broken glass and feces, like we don't share enough premises to even talk coherently. Do you know what I mean? Like we are alien on a level that is deeper than language can get to, basically. And that, I just don't like that feeling. And basically like the feeling of the last 10 years is like, oh, look, like almost half your country wants broken glass in feces. And similarly, like, I don't know how to argue against it. You know what I mean? Like, lying is bad. Like, why do I have to say that out loud? If you don't already know lying is bad, then like, you know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't be violent and abuse weaker people. Like, well, duh. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, I feel very alienated from, it turns out, a lot more people. It's just like a lot of things I thought were widely shared turns out to be not widely shared. And that's really like psychologically destabilizing. I think a lot of people are working through some version of trauma around that.
Well, that
a dark note to end on
is a fitting place to end, but with the added button of if you could give a quick line on what Volts is and tell folks where to find
Oh,
you.
yeah. So Volts, it's volts.wtf. That is a real domain name that I chose in a fit of giggling delight, perhaps too hastily. Volts.wtf. It's a newsletter. It's a podcast. Comes out about twice a week, and we really like it. It is for people who are interested in this energy transition, but who don't know the details. And so I try to make it both substantive, like really meaty, like you'll learn from it, but also approachable, such that you don't have to be an expert to come and make sense of it. That's sort of that's the target. So, if that's you, then you'll enjoy it.
Well, it's definitely me. So thank you again for doing that. And thank you so much for spending now just shy of 2 hours
Yes,
in this
my
conversation.
poor dogs.
Oh, it's been epic. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It was fun.
This podcast is edited and produced by Adam Labrie and me, Jesse Damiani. The podcast is presented by Reality Studies. You can learn more by visiting realitystudies.co. And if you appreciate the work I'm doing, please subscribe and share it with someone you think would enjoy it.